so happy we alive.
Good evening, and welcome to Louisville Late Night. This evening we're in beautiful Vancouver, British Columbia, and we have the privilege of being at the actual headquarters of the Marijuana Party. And I'm also honored to have with us this evening Mr. Dana Larsen, who is the editor of Cannabis Culture magazine, a magazine devoted to highlighting the finer aspects of cannabis and hemp. And without further ado, let's get right into meeting Dana and finding out what's going on here in British Columbia. Dana.
Well, hello. Good to be on your show, and thanks for having me here.
And so what's going on up here in British Columbia?
A lot of good things are going on, and some bad things are going on too, but we're all very busy trying to legalize and promote our favorite herb, of course, and there's a lot of things going on. We got DEA agents coming up here trying to tell our cops that they got to bust more marijuana smokers, and we've got a lot of activists and big rallies coming up, and all kinds of positive things happening.
You're saying U.S. federal agents are interfering with Canada's
Yes, indeed. They talk, the RCMP, Canadian Police Force, is really in many ways a patsy for the American police, the American government. We recently had some DEA agents setting up offices in Vancouver and working with the RCMP to bust Vancouver marijuana growers and marijuana traders and smugglers, and this is all very bad. British Columbians and Canadians don't want American police in our country. We want our country to be governed and policed by Canadians, not by this American influence. And America really exports this drug war all around the world, and Canada is just one more client nation that's the victim of American oppression.
And but I thought things were better up here in British Columbia.
Well, things are a lot better here than compared to anywhere in the U.S., that's for sure. I mean, if you're walking down the street in Vancouver and you're smoking a joint, a police officer will stop you and take it away and maybe search you, but you're unlikely to be charged or taken away to jail unless the officer's having a bad day or you give him some bad attitude. But at the same time, there's many grow-ops in Vancouver and in British Columbia, but the police are also out there busting them every single day. Police go after a couple of grow-ops every day, but unlike many places in America and other parts of the world, if a cops come and bust your grow-op in Vancouver, they're unlikely to charge you. Normally they'll just take your plants away, trash your house, wreck all your grow equipment, and harass your landlord, but they won't actually come after you specifically or charge you that way. So, and if they do charge you, you're probably going to get a fine or something like that. It's pretty rare to go to jail in Vancouver for growing pot, although it certainly does happen. People do go to jail here, but even if they do, it's not typically for these long 10-year sentences you might get in the U.S. But even though we have one law all across Canada, it really varies from province to province as to how it's enforced. So what you get is what happens in Vancouver is very different than other parts of Canada. If you're in Toronto and you get busted for growing or for possession, you're more likely to get charged and go to jail than you are in Vancouver. So it really varies across the country.
Well, Vancouver is kind of getting a worldwide reputation now for excellent herb, isn't it not so?
Well, that's true, and it's partly because we do have great pot, and also partly because we have so much pot per capita. I mean, although places in the States might grow more pot than BC, we grow so much per person that we can afford to export our marijuana down to the States, which gives BC Bud an international reputation, especially in the States. But actually, BC's been a major pot growing region for decades.
Really?
The history of BC marijuana scene really started during the Vietnam War, when a lot of American expatriates who didn't want to be drafted for Vietnam fled the country and came up to Canada, and a lot of them settled in BC. We have a lot of open space here and a lot of open areas. A lot of them settled in BC, and they couldn't work legally because they weren't legal immigrants, so they ended up growing pot for a living, and of course being part of the anti-Vietnam marijuana counterculture that came naturally to them. And over the decades, the marijuana scene has increased here and just continued to grow. And so now we're producing a large quantity of marijuana, most of it for the export market, being brought down to the U.S. And yet I have to say that even though we grow a lot of pot, even though our pot's really good, some of the stuff about BC Bud is kind of inaccurate in the sense that more pot's coming over the Mexican border into the States by far than anything coming in across Canada. BC Bud accounts for 1 or 2% of the pot coming in across the border compared to the seizures at the Mexican border.
Oh, really?
So, but our pot's higher quality than the Mexican pot is, and it's grown indoors normally. It's hydroponic. It's tighter buds. Mexican pot's a bit swaggier and whatnot, but. Nevertheless, although we're bringing a lot of pot in per capita, really it's exaggerated to a certain extent how much BC bud is getting down into the States compared to pot coming in from Mexico, or for that matter, pot produced domestically. And I wouldn't be surprised if some of what's called BC bud on the streets of California is in fact not BC bud at all, but simply called that. Just like when you buy pot on the streets of BC, they call it skunk. But it's not all skunk genetic pool. They just call it skunk because that's a typical name for good pot. So I think in the same way, a lot of BC bud might actually not be from BC at all. But nevertheless, we do have a lot of pot here, probably the world's most active marijuana movement, and a definite, really strong cannabis culture in British Columbia.
All right, tell me a little bit about the marijuana party, if you don't mind.
Well, there's a few different marijuana parties in Canada. There's the federal Canadian marijuana party, there's the provincial BC marijuana party, and we're just instituting the municipal Vancouver marijuana party right now. We have municipal elections coming up in November in every city across British Columbia, and so this will be our third election that we'll be running as the marijuana party. And we had national and provincial elections fairly close together a couple of years back, and so we ran candidates. We ran about 75 candidates federally across the country out of a total pool of about 220 odd seats that are available in Parliament. And then provincially,
how many?
There's about 220 odd seats that are available in our parliament. So that's how many. The country's divided up into ridings. Okay. Every riding elects one person to represent them. Okay. And so the marijuana party ran candidates in about 75 ridings across the country. So about a quarter, or so roughly a third, something like that.
Did any of them get elected?
We did not get anybody elected. No. If you did, that would be a shot heard around the world. Certainly, if someone were to actually get into office. Mm-hmm. But we have a first past the post kind of a system where even if the marijuana party got a significant percentage of votes across the country, they've got to get them all in one area to really win that seat. So it's very difficult to actually get a seat. Mm-hmm. Provincially, it's a similar kind of thing, but provincially we ran candidates in every single riding in the province, something no other political party has ever done in the history of this province for their first election, having candidates in every single riding. And that was about 76 candidates that we ran, or 79 candidates that we ran for to cover the whole province. And only the other two big parties, the Liberals and the NDP party, which is sort of the right and left-wing parties in British Columbia, also ran that many seats. Even the Green Party, which has a very strong presence in British Columbia, only managed to field about 65 candidates, and other parties did even less. Mm-hmm. And so despite that, we got into some of the debates, but some of the debates, televised debates, we were refused access to, even though we're technically a bigger party than some of the other parties that were allowed in. Mm-hmm. But there's certainly a certain amount of anti-marijuana bias in the media, and in that regard, not want to take us seriously. But
has the party grown? I mean, is it on the upswing? Or?
Well, yeah. I mean, between elections, there's not a lot to be done necessarily, but we feel that we got about 56,000 votes in British Columbia, which totaled about 3.5% of the vote overall. And certainly, you know, we're building the party. We're signing up members. We're trying to make the party into a real political organization. For our first election, we formed the party about 2 months before the election was held. So it was a very fast, effort for us from deciding we're going to field these candidates and run this party, getting our candidates together, the election being called, and then boom, it's all over. So we have 4 years now until the next election in British Columbia, and so our focus is really on the municipal elections right now, getting the city elections in Vancouver and Victoria and whatnot.
Is the platform of the party to decriminalize marijuana more like Amsterdam or Netherlands? Or
I don't really like the Amsterdam model. The Amsterdam model works well when you're a small country that's trying to do what you can, but you're surrounded by countries that oppose you. But there's a lot of problems with the Amsterdam model, though it's certainly better than what we have now in Canada, than what they have in the U.S. But I'd rather see a much more open system. People still get busted for growing pot in Amsterdam. And when a coffee shop buys marijuana, it's illegal for them to buy that pot. It's only legal for them to sell it. So they have this weird back door, front door policy where what goes out the front door is allowed, but when the pot comes in the back door, it's illegal. And all of that, it works better than other things, better than prohibition. It's not the ideal model. Mm-hmm. The federal marijuana party and the BC marijuana party have slightly differing platforms. The different people are involved. The federal party had a very simple platform. They support legalizing marijuana to the extent that anybody can grow marijuana in their own home as they choose, of whatever quantity they choose. And if you want to sell marijuana commercially, there should be some kind of infrastructure, regulation, and control over that. So if you're going to sell your pot, claim it's organic, it's got to be organic. You can't spray dangerous pesticides on your marijuana before you sell it. Mm-hmm. Other than that, I don't see any more need for regulation of marijuana than I do of apples. They're both equally dangerous. They're equally, natural products and should be regulated equally. So that was the federal marijuana party's platform, with a very simple, specific focus on marijuana. For the BC marijuana party, we adopted a more libertarian-oriented platform. we didn't take the hardcore libertarian stance that all government must be abolished tomorrow, but we took the viewpoint that people's bodies are their own to do with it as they choose, that less government is better government, and that, the idea that we talked a lot about marijuana being a symbol, and how marijuana was a symbol for, overuse of police power. Marijuana was a symbol for natural medicines that are being banned in Canada on a regular basis. Marijuana is a symbol for your right or your lack of